Ferrari arrived at the Austrian Grand Prix with a sense of confidence they hadn't felt for months. Just 3 weeks earlier in Barcelona, Lewis Hamilton had delivered a breakthrough victory that completely changed the mood around the team. After a difficult start to the season, it finally looked as though Ferrari had found the missing piece. The headlines were optimistic, the paddock was talking about a comeback, and for the first time in a long while, Ferrari looked like a genuine threat again. But Formula One has a habit of testing every assumption. By the end of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend, that confidence had almost completely disappeared. Not because Ferrari suddenly forgot how to build a fast car. And not because Hamilton or Charles Leclerc made costly mistakes. Instead, Austria exposed something much more significant. It suggested that Barcelona may have hidden Ferrari's biggest weakness rather than proving it had been solved. The evidence wasn't immediately obvious to fans watching the race. It wasn't hidden in dramatic radio messages or controversial strategy calls. It was buried inside the telemetry, the speed traces, and the performance data that engineers spend hours studying after every session. And once those numbers were compared with Barcelona, a very different picture started to emerge. To understand why Austria became such an important weekend, we first need to go back to Spain. Hamilton's victory in Barcelona wasn't just another race win, it represented a huge milestone for Ferrari. The team had introduced an updated power unit after receiving development allowances through Formula One's engine balancing regulations. Reports suggested Ferrari's engine had been producing noticeably less performance than the strongest power units on the grid, giving the team an opportunity to introduce improvements aimed at reducing that deficit. The revised engine featured changes designed to improve combustion efficiency, particularly in demanding conditions where high temperatures place extra stress on the power unit. Everything appeared to work perfectly. Hamilton drove brilliantly throughout the weekend and crossed the finish line first. For Ferrari supporters, the conclusion seemed obvious. The new engine had transformed the car. The development program was finally paying off. Even rival teams began paying closer attention to Ferrari's progress. But inside the garage, the reaction was surprisingly measured. Team principal Fred Vasseur repeatedly warned against reading too much into a single result. While everyone else celebrated the victory, he continued reminding reporters that one successful weekend doesn't necessarily prove a car has solved all of its problems. At the time, those comments sounded cautious. Looking back now, they sound remarkably accurate. Because when Formula One arrived in Austria, Ferrari immediately faced a completely different challenge. From the opening practice session, neither Hamilton nor Leclerc looked entirely comfortable behind the wheel. The Red Bull Ring is one of the shortest circuits on the calendar, but it's also one of the most demanding. Long uphill straights, heavy braking zones, and high track temperatures combine to create an environment where even small weaknesses become impossible to hide. Although Ferrari remained competitive on the timing sheets, both drivers reported an unpredictable balance. The car felt inconsistent, grip seemed to disappear without warning, confidence never fully arrived. Then another interesting detail caught the attention of rival engineers. Analysis of Friday's GPS data suggested Ferrari weren't using maximum power on several of the straights. Immediately, speculation spread through the paddock. Perhaps Ferrari were hiding their true pace. Maybe they were protecting the engine ahead of qualifying. Or perhaps they were following exactly the same approach that had worked so well in Barcelona. After all, Ferrari hadn't looked particularly impressive during practice in Spain, either. They improved dramatically when it mattered. So many people assumed Austria would follow the same pattern. Even the race simulations seemed to support that belief. Ferrari's long-run pace looked slightly slower than Mercedes and McLaren, but few teams appeared concerned. Instead, the common opinion around the paddock was simple. Ferrari were sandbagging. They had done it before. Surely they were doing it again. For a while, that theory seemed entirely believable. Then qualifying arrived. Almost overnight, Ferrari looked transformed. Leclerc secured a front-row starting position while Hamilton qualified directly behind him, placing both Ferraris firmly in the fight at the front of the grid. Suddenly, every prediction from Friday appeared to have been correct. The pace was real. The upgrades looked effective. Barcelona hadn't been a fluke after all, or so everyone believed, because what happened on Sunday would completely change the conversation. Not just about Ferrari's performance in Austria, but about the true strengths and weaknesses of the SF26 itself. Sunday began with genuine optimism. Starting near the front gave Ferrari exactly the kind of opportunity they had been hoping for. If the pace they had shown in qualifying carried into the race, Hamilton had every chance of fighting for another victory. For the opening laps, that possibility looked very real. Hamilton made a clean start and quickly settled into the leading group, while Charles Leclerc remained firmly in contention behind him. Ferrari appeared calm, the strategy looked straightforward, and nothing suggested the afternoon was about to unravel. But Formula One races are rarely decided in the first few corners. They're decided by how a car behaves once the tires begin to wear, fuel loads decrease, and drivers start pushing every lap to the limit. That's exactly when Ferrari's problems began to appear. To understand why, you first need to appreciate what makes the Red Bull Ring so unforgiving. Despite being one of the shortest tracks on the calendar, Austria asks very specific questions of every Formula One car. Nearly half of the lap is spent accelerating at full throttle, meaning straight-line efficiency becomes incredibly important. If a car carries too much aerodynamic drag or struggles to deploy its power efficiently, the stopwatch reveals it almost immediately. Then, after those long straights, the circuit flows into a series of medium and high-speed corners where balance and tire management suddenly become the priority. Very few circuits expose both characteristics so clearly. A car can no longer hide behind one particular strength. It has to perform everywhere, and that's where Ferrari started losing ground. Whenever Hamilton entered the technical sections of the circuit, he looked competitive. He carried excellent speed through the corners. The Ferrari changed direction well. The grip was there. But every time the track opened into another straight, the picture changed. Rivals began pulling away. Not dramatically, not by several tenths in one corner. Instead, they gained small amounts of time every lap. Those small differences eventually became impossible to ignore. Watching the race live, many fans assumed it was simply part of close racing. The telemetry later suggested something else. Ferrari wasn't losing time because the drivers lacked confidence. The car simply wasn't generating the same straight-line performance as its main competitors. That weakness created another even bigger problem: dirty air. Whenever Hamilton closed up through the corners, he entered the turbulent airflow behind the car ahead. Modern Formula One cars rely heavily on clean air flowing over their aerodynamic surfaces. Take that clean airflow away, and the tires immediately begin working harder. As the tires slide, temperatures rise. As temperatures rise, grip falls away. Once that cycle begins, recovering performance becomes incredibly difficult. It's one of those problems viewers rarely notice because it doesn't produce dramatic moments. The driver isn't spinning. The car isn't breaking down. Instead, every lap becomes just a fraction slower than the one before. Imagine trying to run a marathon while carrying an increasingly heavy backpack. At first, the extra weight barely matters. Eventually, however, every step becomes more difficult than the last. That's exactly how tire overheating affects a Formula One driver. Each corner demands slightly more effort. Each lap costs a little more time. And by the time the problem becomes visible on the timing screens, it's usually too late to reverse. Ferrari found themselves trapped in exactly that situation. Then came the race's biggest strategic opportunity. A virtual safety car was deployed after another car stopped on track, giving teams the chance to make a relatively inexpensive pit stop. Ferrari reacted immediately. Hamilton switched onto the hard compound tire, hoping the fresher rubber would allow him to attack during the final stages of the race. On paper, it was an excellent decision. Fresh hard tires should have offered greater durability while resisting overheating better than the alternatives. But strategy only works if the car can exploit the advantage it creates. Hamilton rejoined with newer tires than several of the cars around him. Normally, that should have been enough to launch an attack. Instead, the same weakness returned. Each time he closed the gap through the corners, he reached the straights and simply couldn't complete the overtake. Unable to pass, he remained stuck in turbulent air. The tires gradually overheated. The advantage of the fresh rubber disappeared lap by lap. What looked like a clever strategic move quickly became ineffective. At first glance, it was easy to blame Ferrari's decision-making. Looking deeper, however, the strategy wasn't really the problem. The real issue was that the car didn't possess the straight-line performance needed to make the strategy succeed, and perhaps the strongest evidence came from the other side of the garage. Leclerc experienced almost exactly the same race. Despite starting near the front, his pace gradually faded for many of the same reasons. Different driving styles, different race situations, the same outcome. When two drivers report identical limitations, engineers usually reach the same conclusion. The problem isn't the driver, it's the car. By the final stint, Ferrari's challenge for victory had disappeared completely. What had looked like another breakthrough weekend was rapidly becoming one of the most revealing races of the entire season. By the time the checkered flag fell, Ferrari knew this was about much more than a disappointing result. Lewis Hamilton crossed the line well outside the battle for victory, while Charles Leclerc endured an equally frustrating afternoon. Two drivers, two completely different racing styles. Yet both had experienced almost exactly the same problems. That immediately ruled out one possibility. This wasn't about driver error, it wasn't an aggressive setup, and it certainly wasn't bad luck. It was a characteristic built into the car itself. That's one of the first things Formula One engineers look for after every race. If only one driver struggles, the investigation usually begins with driving style, setup, or strategy. But when both cars lose performance in almost identical ways, the focus shifts toward the machine. And that's exactly where Ferrari's engineers were looking after Austria. Following the race, Fred Vasseur admitted the weekend hadn't gone according to plan. He explained that the team had been forced to adapt its strategy as the race developed and accepted that Ferrari still had important work to do before consistently fighting at the front. It wasn't a dramatic statement, but it revealed something important. Ferrari weren't searching for excuses. They were searching for answers. As engineers began studying the data collected throughout the weekend, one pattern appeared again and again. The SF26 remained competitive through medium and high-speed corners, but whenever the circuit demanded maximum straight-line efficiency, Ferrari simply couldn't match its rivals. That weakness then created a second issue by forcing both drivers to spend longer behind other cars, increasing tire temperatures and reducing grip over every stint. In simple terms, one problem was creating another, and that's why Austria became such an important race. It exposed the chain reaction hidden beneath Ferrari's performances all season. Now let's go back to Barcelona for a moment. That victory was real. Hamilton drove exceptionally well, Ferrari executed the weekend almost perfectly, and the upgraded power unit clearly delivered an improvement. None of that changes. But Austria raised a different question. Did Barcelona prove Ferrari had built a championship-winning car, or did it simply prove that Barcelona was a circuit perfectly suited to the SF26's strengths? There's an important difference. Some tracks naturally reward aerodynamic balance and strong cornering performance. Others place far greater emphasis on top speed and efficiency. Barcelona belongs firmly in the first category. Austria belongs in the second. The same car that looked complete in Spain suddenly appeared vulnerable just 3 weeks later. That doesn't mean Ferrari went backwards. It means the weaknesses had never completely disappeared. They had simply been hidden. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson from the Austrian Grand Prix. Formula One isn't about building a car that's brilliant at one circuit. Championships are won by cars that perform almost everywhere. The fastest teams adapt regardless of whether the weekend demands high downforce, long straights, smooth asphalt, or extreme tire management. That's the level Ferrari are still chasing. The encouraging news is that the team now understands where the biggest limitations lie. An engine upgrade can improve power delivery and efficiency, but it can't reduce aerodynamic drag, it can't generate cleaner airflow, and it can't stop tires from overheating when the car spends lap after lap trapped behind a rival. Those challenges require a completely different type of development. New aerodynamic concepts, updated floor designs, refined cooling solutions, months of simulation work. None of those improvements happen overnight. Meanwhile, Ferrari's rivals continue moving forward. Mercedes have built their season around consistency, regularly collecting points even when they aren't the fastest car. Red Bull have recovered significant performance through recent upgrades and once again look capable of challenging at the front on almost any circuit. McLaren remain one of the most balanced teams on the grid, rarely suffering dramatic swings in performance from one weekend to the next. That consistency is exactly what Ferrari still lacks. One strong result creates optimism. One difficult weekend immediately brings fresh questions. Until Ferrari can produce the same level of performance regardless of the circuit layout, those questions won't disappear. And that's why Austria may eventually be remembered as one of the defining weekends of Ferrari's season. Not because they lost, but because they finally discovered the difference between progress and complete progress. Barcelona gave the team confidence. Austria gave them clarity. Sometimes a victory tells you everything you want to hear. A difficult race tells you everything you need to hear. Ferrari now know exactly what must improve before they can fight consistently for championships. The challenge isn't identifying the problem anymore. The challenge is solving it before their rivals move even further ahead, because Formula One never waits. Every race weekend brings another upgrade, another opportunity, another lesson. For Ferrari, the Austrian Grand Prix may not be remembered for where they finished. It may be remembered as the weekend that revealed the final pieces missing from a championship contender. And if the engineers in Maranello can turn those lessons into performance over the coming months, Austria won't be remembered as the race that exposed Ferrari's weaknesses. It will be remembered as the race that finally showed them how to eliminate them.